The Greens leader, Senator Christine Milne, joins me. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Let's start on media reform. Now, the 10 network has appointed a new CEO, and you seem to have some concern about what's going on at 10. Just tell us what those concerns are.
Well, I'm rather concerned about whether news is in breach of the two-thirds rule in terms of media ownership. We've always been concerned about concentrated media ownership, and now the news not only owns the Australian and the tabloids. Lachlan Murdoch has the DMG radio stations around the country, and now they're contracting out Meet the Press. So Meet the Press will be shown on Channel 10, but it's wholly produced by News at their studios by producers who are paid by them. The guests will be invited on by News, and it's likely to happen with the Bolt program as well. So what you're seeing is through the back door, in my view, a breach of the two-thirds media ownership rules, but I wanted that reviewed in the context of that.
But ACMA, who you're suggesting do this, have already looked at the issue of Lachlan Murdoch's position and have found that he isn't in a position to control what goes on at News Limited. He's only a relatively minor shareholder and one of 17 board members there. Yes, he owns the DMG network and has a 9% stake in 10, but he doesn't control what happens at News, according to ACMA.
Oh, well, come on, he's on the board of News internationally. He's the chair of Channel 10. He's now brought someone across from News to be the CEO, and now we find News contracting out programs on 10. So I want ACMA to go back and have a really good look at this, and that's why I've written to them today.
They're earlier finding that he didn't have influence or control over what happened at News. You want them to do that, have a look at that again?
I want them to have a look at it in the light of what's going on with Channel 10. I mean, you can't seriously suggest that with News contracting out that program, essentially Channel 10 is going to screen a program that is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Australian. If you want to see the Australian on TV, you're going to see it on Meet the Press, and you're going to see it on the Bolt program, and that'll be coming later in the year. Now, that is an issue of actually getting influence in television through the back door, and that's what I'd like ACMA to look at.
And on this CEO, Hamish McClelland, he was, as I understand it, only at News for a little more than a year, but you're saying he's a News Limited appointee.
He's absolutely a News Limited.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's pretty obvious what's going on, and the fact that he's come straight from News across to Channel 10 with Lachlan Murdoch in the chair. Let ACMA have a look and assess it, but it really comes to this point of making sure we don't end up with a greater concentration of media ownership in Australia. We want greater diversity, and I think that's the point I was trying to get from the government today, to give an unequivocal guarantee that we're not going to allow more concentration of media ownership. We need to open it up. If
ACMA finds there's no problem and find once again that Lachlan Murdoch does not control what happens at News, yes, he obviously has an influence at 10, will you be satisfied with that finding?
Well, I won't be satisfied, but I'll have to accept it because, after all, they're the regulator in this case. But I do think Australians will start to see it and be rather concerned that we're seeing the Murdochs go and get control of 10 again. After all, Rupert owned Channel 10 and then he had to divest it when they bought up all the tabloids. Having now achieved that penetration in the print media, they're now coming back for Channel 10, and it's pretty obvious that's the way things are going. And in the Australian media environment, we want to make sure that we get greater diversity of ownership, and I particularly want to see the ABC stay strong and get more funding, particularly for their online presence.
But isn't this happening at the moment? I mean, the ABC has recently received more funding. It's now got a news channel as well, and we've got new starters like The Guardian and Global Mail springing up in Australia. We've got a lot of digital channels going on, free to a lot of news channels that you can watch on Foxtel as well. Isn't the industry already doing this diversity that you're saying is not happening?
Well, the industry is certainly in transition, and every week you see a different player get involved in some which ways.
But isn't that a good thing?
It's a good thing, but nevertheless what we're seeing is the encroachment of news. If you look at the concentration of ownership in the print media especially, that is of grave concern. And then when you see that print media influence coming through television and through radio, that is in breach, in my view, of the rules. But it's not up to me to make that decision, it's up to ACMA, so let's see what they say.
But do you appreciate that as the media landscape changes, this convergence that we hear about, this is inevitable, that you're going to have newspapers getting involved in broadcast this is all part of the convergence that's happening.
And that's why we want to see the recommendations of the Convergence Review and the Finkelstein inquiry implemented before the election. Now, of course, we don't know exactly what the government's putting up, so we want to have a look at it.
They haven't consulted you on this?
We've had talks initially, and we did that at the end of last year, but we haven't seen any legislation. So we
they
want
won't consult you now, obviously, that you've
we want to
the
see the legislation very clearly to make sure that it does do what we want to have done. But things like, you know, the national interest test, clearly the privacy tort. On the one level, we do want to make sure that the media still can investigate what they need to investigate. That's really important in a democracy, but at the same time, people need to have their privacy respected. So that privacy tort is going to be quite a difficult balance, but we want to talk to the government about that in the course of the legislation coming forward.
But just before we move on, where's the problem here when it comes to the need for a privacy tort, when it comes to the need for tighter controls around ownership and tests on the character of owners? Where is the problem? It seems news is your biggest concern. Oh,
well, we followed the Leveson inquiry the same as everyone else, and we're seeing the same sort of tendencies occur.
But there was nothing like that found here.
And that's why we want to make sure that we open it up rather than allow greater concentration.
Where's the problem here? Where's the problem in Australia?
Well, I've just cited the concentration of the media ownership is becoming greater with news moving in the way it is, and I believe that that is in breach of the two-thirds rule, and that's why I want ACMA to go and look at that again.
Okay. On education, do you think the government will land the Gonski reforms that the Prime Minister's talked so much about?
Well, if they don't, it will be such a breach of faith and trust with the Australian community. I mean, the Prime Minister was the Education Minister in 2007 when the Labor Party came to power. She deferred consideration of this unequal funding model then. Everybody has known this needed to happen. It's been deferred, and now we're at the last gasp of the government. It would be appalling if this didn't get through, and I want it in, the actual funding model in and legislated, to go to the polls. If Labor goes there saying you have to vote for us or you won't get this, that is effectively condemning another generation of students in Australia to a really unequal funding model.
So what leverage do you have to force their hand on this before the election?
Well, it's the Australian community is going to have to put some pressure on. The Education Union is already out there calling for it. We are certainly saying to the government, bring forward this funding model. Now, of course, it's now reliant on COAG. I said last year to Peter Garrett, you know, we want an unequivocal guarantee you will bring this forward for legislation by the end of the year. He refused to do that. That was at the AEU conference last year. He refused to do it. Now we're in this situation where there are more coalition states. They are now sensing a coalition victory. They are now protecting an unequal funding model, and it is all at risk. And I don't want the future of Australian school children and the capacity to get schools with disadvantage properly funded. I don't want to lose that, well, in fact, so we're really pushing hard.
You're suggesting an amendment to prioritise those most needy public schools first. But you've also made clear that if that's voted down, you'll still back the Gonski reforms.
Absolutely.
Why not threaten the whole thing if you're so determined about this?
Because I'm determined that we're going to get it through, and I won't do anything to threaten it. But the point is that with the government refusing to raise the money from the mining tax, the time frame means that the full implementation of the Gonski review is not till 2019-2020. Now, students will have left school who started in 2007 still waiting for a more equal funding and a fairer funding model. We support the needs-based recommendations of Gonski, and I want the full implementation brought forward.
But there's not much you can do to force that, is there?
No, but that's why the amendment is there, to say, well, if you're not going to bring it forward, at least prioritise the most disadvantaged schools. Don't just leave them hanging out there till 2019-20, and I think most Australians would agree with that, because what you're seeing...
Why flag before you even put it up that you'll regardless of what happens to that amendment, you'll still vote for the package?
Because I don't want the government to have any excuse at all for saying that they didn't bring it on or didn't deal with it because they weren't prepared to prioritise the most disadvantaged schools. I don't want a single thing. As I've said, I want the full Gonski and I want it fast-tracked, and that's the Greens' position.
Senator Christine Milne, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
After the break, our panel, Bruce Hawker and Graham Morris. Stay with us.